did you ever think that you would be like a co-founder and CEO of an ad agency?
No. Yeah. I mean, so I've started so many businesses over time. My first one was actually, it was joke-city.com. I was 12 or 13. Um,
Oh, I didn't realize you were so young.
yeah. So at the time I just save up my own money to buy a domain, for jokecity.com. And it was like 200 some bucks. And so I saved up my money and I bought this domain name. Then I had to figure out how to write a website. There weren't cool tools like there are now. So I use Microsoft Front Page. I'm pretty sure that doesn't even exist anymore. Taught myself HTML.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was able to get like some open source JavaScript menus that would drop down, and essentially just started taking jokes from other websites and putting them on my
I was gonna
website.
ask, 'cause, I mean, you have a lot of talents and good qualities, but jokes aren't really high up there, I would say.
I'm super funny. Yeah.
They used to always do dad jokes like after team meetings. Sean Morgan, he's really good at dad jokes for whatever reason. And Joe, sometimes it takes him a little bit to get the joke, and then he goes on to explain the joke. Um,
Well, yeah. I mean, you can laugh, but how do you know you actually got it? And so my perspective is I'll explain the joke back to you after, which makes it super funny.
yeah. Okay, so you sniped the jokes from other
Yep,
locations.
yep.
Okay.
And then I ran banner ads. And so at the time you
Oh,
get like
wow.
10 to
Okay.
15 cents. So kind of full circle here.
Yeah.
Yep. And so then we would go into computer lab. So we had computer lab back in the day. So I'm dating
We did
myself a
too.
little bit.
I did too.
Okay. All right. Yep. And then I'd have everybody click on my banner ads. Um, but if I remember right, I had over 1 million unique visitors to the website.
So was it not pay per click?
It was pay per click.
Oh, so
Yep.
you were paying for those. Okay.
No, so I would advertise for other people. I would put banner ads. And so I made a couple $1,000s as a 12 or 13-year-old, and then found that I had to
Oh,
pay small business taxes, which as a 12-year-old is a very tough thing to. It's like, no, I made this. Like, why do I have to pay?
reality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I had to pay a lot in too. Yeah. So that was my first business. I had another one where I was brewing beer at the time. I'm a chemical engineer, and
Not when you were
so
12, right?
no,
Okay.
this was in college. Yep, I think I was of legal age. Yeah, and so to brew all grain beer, you want to keep the water at a constant temperature. And so we made this little temperature controller that you would pump water through it. You would heat it up to a certain temperature, and it was constant. You just press some buttons and worked great. Formed an LLC. We were going to market it, and then just did a little safety check. And I was like, well, what happens if this gets plugged off? Which is kind of a common thing where you got a bunch of grains and they plug off the pump. And within 30 seconds of it getting plugged off, it started smoking and
Oh,
melting in the case. Um,
so a fire hazard. Okay.
so we did not go to market with that product. So yeah, that business literally went up.
So that was in college.
That one went up in flames. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, well, literally.
Yep.
Yep. Um, so that's when you were going to school to be a chemical engineer. So that like a line. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. I had another podcast. If you want to find the Microbrewer podcast, it was when craft beer was really taking off, and a lot of breweries were popping up. And so I started interviewing different brewery owners,
Oh,
uh,
that's cool.
yeah, which was really fun.
Yeah.
So that was my initial foray into podcasting.
Interesting. Like your past really does kind of connect to where you've ended up in many ways.
Yeah. Another one that I had it was called My State Love. It was a t-shirt company that my wife and I started. And
Oh, Sarah was involved.
she was involved. Yep. Yep. And so we had these different, I still have some of the t-shirts, but it's
I
just,
saw a Wisconsin one.
yeah. Yep. So, yep, we got a couple of those, and, yep. So that was our first foray into like selling online.
So did you have like a Cricut or something? Did you make it on your own?
I know we just ordered a bunch of them and then sold them on our website and everything. And yep, I didn't do the math ahead of time on how much we would make per t-shirt, which ended up not being very much. So, yeah, yeah, and then Sarah and my wife and I, we decided that it's probably not the best that we work together on a professional level.
We all learn those lessons some way or another.
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, marriage is very strong. Just we don't work together on it. So yeah.
Live and you learn.
Yep. So that was another business that I had. And then that got into selling on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you were a chemical engineer there for a while.
Yep. I was a chemical engineer, working at a refinery, doing construction stuff. Yeah, I did a corporate finance role for a while. I got my MBA in finance. So I was valuing really large scale projects and everything. And
Yeah, like that one line project where you had divers going under and had to live in that valve.
yeah, yep, yep.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, managed a construction project where we had to work on a pipeline under 290 feet underwater, and so we had divers doing that, and that's where I got a few of these gray hairs started popping up.
It's very stressful.
Yeah, yeah, and then and that's where I got into Amazon. Long story short for that was my wife and I were in Kansas at the time. We were pregnant with our first kiddo. And we both grew up in the northern Minnesota area. You can hear it from my accent. Yes. But we always grew up with our family super close. So grandparents, parents, everybody's in the area. And so when we had our first kiddo, it was like, man, we really need to be close to them. Trying to move back up to Duluth, Minnesota, very small market. And it's like, okay, as a chemical engineer with this finance MBA, like, what am I going to do to be able to move back up here? And so that was the driver for, hey, I'm going to start something else and see if we can get this to take off and see if this will help us move back up to northern Minnesota to be with the family to raise our kiddos. And so, yeah, it started doing the retail arbitrage side for a little while. My first purchases was an Office Max that was going out of business in Wichita. Looked up some products that were there, and it's like, hey, these are selling for a lot more on Amazon. And filled up my cart with $1,000 worth of stuff, which was non-returnable because it was going out of business. And quickly learned some lessons. Like I bought some Monster headphones that were under brand registry at the time, so you couldn't even sell those. So I actually still have those. But sold some products there, figured out how to ship into Amazon. And then as I was doing that, really got into building a private label. So I was selling these organic chemistry molecular model kits for OChem courses. So super cool product. And so it's like these little plastic sets that you get when you're taking organic chemistry in college. For me, it was like $80 to buy this from a bookstore. And so I was able to offer that for a lot cheaper. Reached out to a lot of different college professors. And so you can find the OChem professors, and then we would send them these products for free, and we'd say, hey, if this would be helpful for your class, like you should add this to your recommended list. And so all of a sudden there'd be some professors who are like, yeah, this really makes sense, and it's a lot cheaper than what I can get. I'm going to put it as required materials for my classes, and there's 2 classes of 300 students each.
Nice.
And so we ended up with this nice recurring revenue stream, and built out the Amazon business along with that. And that's where I started getting into this thing called Amazon advertising, in the very early days. And it was really fun because I mean, at the time it was just sponsored products. You could just do keyword bidding. You couldn't do product targeting. There was no negatives. Like it was so basic. And even at that time, it was intimidating as a seller coming into it. Just I hadn't dealt with advertising before, other than running my own banner ads decades ago on my joke website. And so getting into that, I quickly found the issue of like, it's really hard to scale what I'm doing here. And so I built up some basic spreadsheets to help me out, do some bulk operations. And that's where we really got the start on building out Ad Advance. So I was working with my co-founder, Matt, at the construction job. He's a financial analyst, like brilliant dude at just building up systems that can be rolled out to the whole team. And so I saw that there's certain things I'm good at. There's other things that I'm not. And Matt really fills a lot of those gaps. So we sat down together, started building out our software, and worked for a couple of years on the software and the process before we started scaling our agency. So that's really the foundation of Ad Advance. It's kind of that tech first, product first approach. And then once we feel like we have it nailed, now let's start jumping into those markets. And that's where we really started to scale, helping out sellers and brands.
So when you started selling in 2014, what did the Amazon community feel like? I mean, was there, right now there's so many people in the space, a lot of gurus and people like that, lots of podcasts, so many resources to get your hands on. 10 years ago, what did that look like?
Yeah, it was the Wild West where it's like everybody's just trying to figure this out. So with FBA being launched, all of a sudden you didn't have to deal with shipping your products to individuals. And so this was really like a groundbreaking launch that Amazon had done. And with this Amazon advertising thing coming up, it's like, okay, this is really cool. I remember complaining like, my ACOS is too high, and it was like 5% or something stupid. And so it was more just like a little adder where it's like, yeah, I'll do this advertising thing too. At the time, everybody was just trying to figure it out. Amazon started expanding the ads that they were running. So starting out with just sponsored products, auto manual campaigns, really no controls. Then this thing called headline search ads came along. And for anybody who knows what headline search ads are, it was the early renditions of what's become sponsored brands.
So they didn't call them sponsored brands.
Nope. No. So originally we had to go back and change our code base a bit because it kept referring to HSA. And over time, people didn't know what that was. And so we had to switch that up. I think all HSA is now out of the code base and the database and everything. But yeah, that was the early rendition because it was a headline search ad. It was the top banner ad on the search.
Makes sense.
Yep. And so then they expanded that to be a little bit more generic and sponsored brands as the ad type grew. And then along a little later came sponsored display. And so this was another cool one. And this was before Amazon's DSP was really catching on too. And so that was a way where it's like, okay, I can show up and my ad can show below the buy box and a couple other unique areas. And there's this thing called audience targeting I can do. And so for each step, it was this new feature comes out. And then it's like immediately we go into, okay, how can we utilize this where it's going to be super valuable for us as sellers and for brands overall. And so it's been this continual evolution. And in the early days, there's still a really, really good community feel in the Amazon space. It was just different because everybody was trying to figure this out, and we just saw this huge growing pie ahead of us. And so a very small community. Every time I go to conferences right now, I'm still seeing people that I knew from the early days. Yeah, it was a really cool time. There were a couple podcasts that I think it was the Amazing Seller podcast from way back in the day that was super helpful in just figuring out how you even do this. And it wasn't like advanced strategies at the time. It's like literally like, how do I package my products up and send them into Amazon? Like, what do I print out for these shipping labels? Like, it was the basics, but there's so much that goes into it. And so now if I got into the space, it would be so overwhelming where we're getting in really early. You could just add on these layers at a time. And so I have so much respect for people who are starting an e-com business today or just recently because it is so much more complex.
There's a lot to get up to speed on.
There is.
Where, like in 2014 when you started and how you started, it was kind of like a side hustle to see if it could become something bigger and get you to a new spot. And I feel like that's how a lot of people were able to start back then. You hear a lot of those stories of side gigs that turn into like a full-blown business. Do you think that's possible now?
I think it's possible. I think it's a lot harder. And there's been a couple fundamental shifts that have happened in the space. So in 2014, when I got going, the key focus for Amazon was let's try to expand as many products. Let's try to expand our product selection as much as we can. And so with that, there weren't many roadblocks in launching a new product because they were fully encouraging, let's get as many products and as many brands as we can out there. And so it made it a lot easier in terms of launching a brand from that perspective. There obviously wasn't as much competition. Advertising was a lot cheaper just because there wasn't as much competition. Advertising was a lot easier just because there wasn't as many options. Um, Over time, what's happened is Amazon got to the point where they're like, okay, we have pretty much every product under the sun. And now to continue to expand or improve the customer experience, we have to focus on quality. And so that shift to quality shifted the algos and it really focused on what's those established brands that we know are going to deliver quality. It didn't favor as many of the here's a new brand, check it out. And you could see this rapid growth. Another big barrier that's more challenging now, like when I started, getting reviews, like you used to be able to give free products in exchange for a review, and it was completely legit and per the terms of service. It sounds crazy now. There was a site called Thomason where you would say, hey, I want reviews, and you would post your product, and then people would say, yep, send it to me for free. And then I would just go into my Seller Central account and I'd ship them a product. And then I would get a review back. And you would get rated on the quality of your reviews, which meant like you would get rated on if you left good reviews or not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you could just factor in terms of your startup costs where it's like, all right, I got to ship out 300 products. Out of those, I'm probably going to get 250 reviews. Super easy to figure out. And you could immediately establish this credibility on the site from those customer reviews. How credible those reviews actually were is a big question, which is why Amazon changed its policy. But that made it a lot easier to launch new products too, is you immediately had that credibility and the customer reviews to get going.
Yeah, launching a new product seems very daunting
Yeah.
at this day and age.
Yeah. And so now the key things that you really have to there are still so many people that are succeeding launching new products and new brands on Amazon. There are success stories happening every day. When I started, the barrier was much lower in terms of what you really needed to provide in terms of a unique product, and then how you actually marketed that, and the listing and everything else like that. Now, the success that I'm seeing is those who are really good at those details in terms of getting a really solid product detail page, who know Amazon advertising really well, and can bring that unique product that you can't just go onto Alibaba and find from a typical manufacturer. We didn't have to worry about that as much in the early days of the ecosystem. And so the key advantage now and those challenger brands that are really succeeding are the ones that either build a team around them that can leverage all these tools that are available, or those ones who have already built out the internal capabilities to do that themselves. And so while there's a lot of challenges right now in the complexity in the system, if you can leverage that complexity, that's the brands that are succeeding. And so with Amazon advertising, there's so many tools that are available. There's so many features available, targeting methods, measurement options. And so those that are really succeeding are being able to leverage these a lot better. And if you look at those enterprise brands who are now coming down the funnel into performance marketing, they're still taking a more brand marketing approach where they're not looking into this measurement in as much detail. And so some of these challenger brands that grew up in the performance marketing space that had to measure every single sale, and they're working their way up in the marketing funnel, they're doing a really good job. Because we're just geared that way, being Amazon sellers and living in the performance marketing mindset. And so that's where, as a challenger brand, if you can really leverage the tools that are available, and if you get really good at managing the ecosystem itself, that's where I'm seeing a lot of success overall. Obviously, it comes down to the product, but then how good are you at all these other pieces like product detail page, the listing itself, tentpole events, optimizing around different deal days, like all those different areas. If you can provide a higher level of attention and detail than some of these big brands coming in, that's where I'm seeing these challenger brands eating up market share over time and really growing to be some of those bigger brands that they once sought to dethrone.
Right, you can't go dollar for dollar with those big brands. So you have to be a little scrappier.
Yeah.
And that means like full utilization of what Amazon has to offer. And it's a lot. So you need the right people who can navigate all those nuances, iterate, test, experiment, and go from there.
Yeah, and that's where we get a lot of energy from is there's all these brands with all these different challenges that they're facing every day. And if we can just bring that level of complexity and sophistication to one area, we can help to set that brand apart. And so for those challenger brands that are really looking to compete against some of the big guys, that's where we really get excited. Because growing up in the performance marketing area and then moving further and further and further up the funnel, we can bring that next level of detail that the enterprise brands that aren't used to that, they're just not providing. And it's that level of detail in terms of targeting, measurement, optimization that can really set you apart, especially as advertising is continually a bigger and bigger slice of that pie as advertising costs go up.